Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth episode of this video blog, World Economics, of the Fundación, Foundation Rafael del Pino. Thank you so much for the success of the first three episodes, and thank you so much for your questions and for the comments. The main comments that we have received in the last, from the last three episodes are about the global slowdown. The global slowdown, what can be done about it, and what are central banks doing about it, and why is it happening? Let's start with the Eurozone. The Eurozone slowdown should not be a surprise to anyone that follows the European economy. It is basically the effect of high overcapacity, high level of debt, high level of government spending, aging of the population. Demographics are very important. And that is what informs this slowdown. And more importantly, why? Because the levels of growth that we saw in the first years after the recovery and after the crisis were basically coming from a very low level. So what we are seeing is not that the current levels of growth estimated by the European Central Bank, by the global authorities, those levels of growth are too low, is that the levels of growth that the European Union showed in the first years of recovery were exceptional. Were exceptional because they came from a very big slump, and therefore where there was a lot of room for recovery. But we cannot expect an economic area that is, it's around, the Eurozone is around 7% of the population of the world, about 22% of the global GDP, and about 58% of social public spending. So obviously, the amount of public spending is a big factor in keeping growth rates much lower than other economies. The aging of the population is a very important factor in terms of understanding consumption patterns. While the European Central Bank is trying to address inflation and thinks that inflation is very low, it is not a surprise that in Italy, in France, even in Spain, for example, in major economies in the Eurozone, there is a big concern about the cost of living and the purchasing power of salaries. It is not a surprise. It is because what the central planners believe is very low inflation is actually a very steep increase in cost of living, including taxes and including, obviously, the basic goods and services that consumers spend on. A very steep increase, especially relative to disposable income and to real salaries. As such, we need to be aware that aging of the population, technology as a disinflationary effect need to be considered. Aging of the population, different consumption patterns, different ways of addressing saving, etc., much more conservative decisions in terms of consumption, particularly technology. Disinflationary. Technology is disinflationary, and in an area like the Eurozone, in which most of the industries come from what we can call the old economy, disinflationary effects have a double negative impact. On one side, the old economy is not improving as expected and overcapacity is not addressed, and on the other side we don't have the global technology leaders that the United States or China have that offset the impact of changes in the productive and industrial pattern. So if we look at the slowdown of the global economies, it comes fundamentally from a view that was predicated on magic, on the idea that we would see higher levels of growth because of monetary policy. And monetary policy in China, in the United States, in the Eurozone, in Japan, what it's doing is incentivizing debt and perpetuating overcapacity. Zombie firms are rising. Number of companies that have that cannot pay their interest expenses with operating profits is rising, and that means even with low interest rates, you have a worsening of the underlying effects of the economy. Therefore, capital expenditure plans are not rising. The governments present themselves as a solution and increase expenditure in white elephants and current spending, and by doing so, the productive versus underproductive balance is worsened. What it means is basically that we are subsidizing low productivity sectors at the expense of savers and high productivity sectors that suffer the tax wedge. When we look at that, what we need to see simply is that what we have ahead of us is a period of low growth, low inflation, low interest rates. Phenomenal. Now, we understand that process, and more liquidity, lower interest rates, negative interest rates, modern monetary theory, magic solutions as we explained in the second episode, those are not going to address that problem. They might create a bump effect for a short period and then resume this process of slow growth, no? But it is slow growth. What we need to understand is that this whole process might perpetuate and prolong the process of evolution and change in the production and consumption patterns, but it is not stopping the main global trends. What are the main global trends? One, technology. Technology disinflation is very positive for consumers, and the technology revolution will be much better for consumers, for job creation, and for the overall growth pattern of economies. But that is disinflationary, and it's negative for tax revenues. This is something that we must address when talking about new Green Deals and stuff. Second, aging of the population in developed economies. Change of consumption patterns, more conservative approach, that is fine. Nothing bad about it. We live a lot longer. That is very, very good for health businesses, for health care, for those for that development of technology and services for that aging population. Third, the growth of the middle class in the developing economies. We're seeing a massive growth in the middle class in developing economies. That middle class wants better and more quality services and goods. That middle class also wants better experiences. It's good for tourism. It's good for services. It's great for that underlying improvement also of global economies. We are getting poverty is being reduced dramatically, and equality is at the global level is improving. So those three factors are very good. What's the bad part? The bad part is debt. Debt, increasing debt, and this constant idea that more debt is not a problem and that we can increase debt as much as we want because that is not a risk and that governments can spend whatever they want. All those things that we addressed on the second episode of our blog, all those things are incorrect. More debt makes economies less dynamic. And more importantly, it creates a perverse incentive for economies not to address quickly the other three very important, not challenges, but opportunities of the global environment. Therefore, what we need to do is to address those three. And to address those three, addressing as well the fourth by not incentivizing higher debt and higher deficits. Higher deficits are not going to solve this problem. They're going to make it more challenging. But we cannot forget that there is growth, that there are very important areas that even in a slowdown will continue to thrive. That those areas are the ones that will be the drivers of higher productivity, better progress, and better goods and services for everyone in the future. So let's try to forget the dystopian views that we tend to get in questions. Let's address the challenges with reality, but let's be fairly honest. The reality is that what we are living right now is the beginning of an absolute massive boom in terms of progress, social improvement, equality, and reduction of poverty. And that will happen with or without the help of governments. Thank you so much. See you on the 5th episode.